This summer, fall in love with DC all over again. District Bridge's summer bucket list is back. Think frozen cocktails at local bars, splashy pool days, museum adventures, fun challenges that support small business and spark everyday joy. Top players could win up to $250 in gift cards and prizes from the places that make DC feel like home. The party is running through August 15th. Sign up for free at districtbridges.org/DC Summer Bucket List.
Today on CityCast DC, it's our Friday News Roundup. And the news for local Washington, well, it ain't great. The Supreme Court has given the green light to the Trump administration's plan for mass firings of federal workers, a.k.a. a lot of our neighbors. We're talking about what that means for the DMV economy. Plus, the president is musing again about taking over D.C. We're going to get into what's behind this. But it's not all bad, at least not for kids with mason jars. There are more Fireflies than ever. And in a members-only fourth topic, we're going to get into DC's feelings about the totally redrawn bus map now that it's been in place for a couple of weeks. I'm here with WAMU's Alex Koma and my CityCast colleague, Julia Karen. Today is Friday, July 11th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC's talking about. One quick note before we start. This Friday's Roundup is sponsored by Nace Law Group. If you're a real CityCast fan, you've heard us raving about our longtime sponsor, Paulson & Nace. Well, now you're just going to hear us raving about Nace Law Group. It's the same great team with just a new name. Hey, Julia.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Alex.
So hello.
It's awesome to see you again.
Yeah, same here.
So the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court this week, made a non-decision decision that said, well, we're not going to weigh the merits of this case about whether the president can just reduce via mass firings these federal agencies without Congress. We're just going to let it go ahead, and even as the other litigation goes through. That's like maybe a distinction without a difference, because by the time the other litigation gets heard, people's lives will be upended and entire agencies will be changed. This is, for those of us who live here, it is not just a theoretical or political question. It's actually an economic one. It's I'm sure both of you guys know a bunch of people who've already been affected by the cuts, and this likely means it's going to be even more folks. Alex, you used to be a Business Journal reporter. You cover the local economy pretty well. What does this mean, sort of big picture and then smaller pictures?
Yeah, I think that most people, whether they were a Fed themselves or someone working in the DC government and worried about the impacts of this, were expecting these firings to move ahead at some point or another. And so I guess in some ways, the Supreme Court's ruling is like a relief where it's like, okay, we're not in this limbo anymore. Now we know it's as bad as we feared, essentially, and can move forward. So in terms of the DC economy, I mean, it's not as reliant on the federal government as maybe it used to be. There have been efforts to diversify it away from entirely being reliant on the feds. That's why you saw such an effort back in 2019, 2018 to land Amazon's second headquarters, even though that has not panned out to be quite the jobs generator that it was initially promised. The whole idea was if something like this happens, that the city and the region has something to fall back on. So, things are kind of grim for the state of the economy. I mean, just in DC alone, you have a projected $1 billion of lost revenue over the next 3 years, largely due to those, sort of federal job cuts that the city's chief financial officer said it was reasonable to expect. That hasn't fully materialized yet. So that is still just an estimate. And we don't yet know whether that is an over-exaggeration. Maybe it is missing some of the, spillover effects that are hard to predict because, of course, it's more than just the literal federal workers. It's all the ancillary businesses, all the contractors who themselves are also starting to, pull back because they're getting less business from the federal government, or they fear that, they're going to get the Trump administration coming after them for, woke programs or whatever. So it's not the best place to be in DC. It's been the primary debate dominating the local budget conversation that we're having because we don't really know what the economic picture is going to look like other than it's not going to be great.
Now, the majority of the people losing jobs just because the majority of the people in the entire region are in Maryland and Virginia, not in D.C., although D.C. is maybe more dependent on those jobs. Where does D.C. lose money besides the taxes that for no longer employed people will be paying?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a decent number of people who are still in DC, but you're right. It's not the same as compared to the suburbs. Where they really start to lose them are in all the ancillary benefits. I mean, the city had already been taking a pounding in, the sort of business activity that's happening downtown, that's happening around the large federal offices due to the pandemic. So they see Trump come into the office a second time. He's talking about return to the office. And Mayor Muriel Bowser, she's rubbing her hands together and she's going, great, I've been pushing this for years, And then he pulls the rug out from under her and says, actually, we're returning to the office, but not everybody's returning to the office, right? So, they're losing out on all of these ancillary benefits of getting people on the metro, getting people at businesses downtown. And, and as I said, that spillover benefit for the other businesses that take advantage of the federal government's presence here, the contractors, the lobbyists, the lawyers, they can't afford to employ the same number of people. So it's a real domino effect.
So one thing that I keep looking at is the fact that this is coming at a time where there's another 3-month hiring freeze from the feds. They basically said, we're not hiring people for however many months. Along with the fact that currently the court's decision, it unfreezes 40 dismissal actions at 17 agencies, but that's going to fluctuate because who knows what's going to happen. Is this the death of DC as a company town? Should we be worried?
I mean, the federal government's always going to exist. Well, maybe, hey, never say never. But, for the foreseeable future, we're going to have a federal government, and that means that DC is going to be reliant upon it. But I mean, look, even whether or not, these specific dismissal actions, go forward, I think a very real situation is people who are preemptively leaving the federal government, who are taking a look at, what's coming down the pike. Maybe they've been there for a few decades and they're ready to cash out. Some people have argued to me that, there are some feds that maybe, that's justified. They've been there a little too long, but that has huge disruptive impacts on the city's economy as you have these people who are out there trying to get new jobs for the first time in a long time. That's not to say the local economy can't absorb them because of the so many ancillary businesses around that rely on federal government expertise. I think that it's reasonable to expect that many of the people being laid off will still stick around, that there's certainly a very high floor to, the DC economy writ large because of the simple fact that we need a federal government, we need civil servants, even if the Trump administration doesn't think so. But I mean, I don't want to undersell the disruption here either.
Well, Alex, the hiring data, private sector hiring data is really grim. I mean, that people are not hiring, particularly not hiring white collar workers of the sort who are being let go from the federal government. These, it used to be you could leave federal service and you might even get a raise, albeit less security, working in a private sector, because the kinds of Washington so-called private sector companies are often contractors that do a lot of government work and need the kind of expertise government already has. But they're clamming up too, which is a really tough spot. I remember interviewing a headhunter once whose theory on this was look, maybe the city, the regional economy, which is a pretty big region, pretty robust region, can absorb a lot of these losses. But the real impact, it's years down the line that historically Washington attracts people, the kind of people who move here often move here for the government or something closely government adjacent. They may then, leave and start a business or do something else economic. But that's the original magnet. And when the magnet, both its intensity gets turned down because it's hiring fewer people, and also it may be a less attractive place to work because the vibe now is, instead of being a respected professional public servant, you're supposed to act like a political hack. And that may be less appealing to a lot of people. That both of those things are going to really reduce the sort of lure that has been part of the dynamism here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very reasonable concern. I mean, when you see the big contractors, the Deloittes and the Booz Allen Hamiltons of the world, starting to lay off people, that should be like your number one warning sign if you're from the DC area, right? That's normally like if you're coming out of college, that is the job that you can get in the DC area if you've got a half decent business degree, right? Is working for one of the big contractors who works, for one of the federal agencies. And they are, both because of DOGE and because of the worsening economic picture starting to pull back. And those are the sorts of businesses that people thought were essentially recession proof. And really the economy as a whole was. I mean, we weathered the Great Recession here better than just about anywhere else in the country, essentially because of this. And now we're sort of in this inverse scenario where we are having our own mini recession while the rest of the country does quite well economically. That doesn't seem ideal.
Wait, Alex, just practically, what happens now? The DOGE cuts, the so-called fork in the road, that hasn't shown up in any economic data because those folks are still being paid until September. Maybe they're pulling back their personal spending, but we're not seeing the big hit. This stuff, is there any expected timing? I know the State Department is raring to go with cutting 15% of its people. But with the rest of the federal government, is it going to happen like this month, this summer, this year? What do we know?
Yeah, I think that, it's going to depend based on, as you say, the zealousness of each agency. So I think by the end of this year, just based on what the DC chief financial officer has said in terms of, where he's expecting the job losses to really start taking a hit. He recently said, look, most of these layoffs are because of all the legal, hoops you got to jump through, all the stuff we've been discussing. That's not likely to really have an effect, this year. But by the end of this year, maybe even as soon as the fall, we could really start to see the job numbers really slipping. And by the end of the year, then that's when the true impact, I think, will become really clear. And so, again, could it end up not being as bad as we were expecting? Yes, but it could also be worse.
If you're a CityCast superfan, then you probably know that we've teamed up with a new platform called Backroom to help keep our conversations going outside of the podcast, and maybe even turn them into real solutions. We knew CityCast listeners cared about this city, but your response really proved it. The pilot packed out, but Backroom has opened a few more spots just for you. Backroom brings people together in focused discussion rooms to talk through local issues, exchange ideas, and work toward shared takeaways. It uses AI to support the conversation, not by steering it or adding content, but by helping participants express themselves clearly and cutting through the noise that so often gets in the way of progress. Then, based entirely on the ideas and arguments shared in the room, Backroom proposes a clear, actionable solution that reflects the group's collective thinking. So if you've ever wanted to go deeper after a CityCast DC episode, this is the place to do it. Help shape solutions for your block, your neighborhood, your city. Head to the link in the show notes to join the pilot or hop on the waitlist. Spots are limited, so sign up now to be one of the first to test out Backroom. Backroom, a platform for problem solvers.
All right, suffice it to say, we are in some morally ambiguous times right now, rife with hot-button issues. So it makes sense that we'd need help sorting through sticky situations and moral dilemmas. Enter philosopher and New York Times ethics columnist Kwame Anthony Appiah. He'll be at the Library of Congress on July 24th for a live event, Ask the Ethicist, hosted by the library's John W. Kluge Center. Explore real-world moral dilemmas and cast your vote on what you would do. Then hear how one of today's most influential public philosophers thinks through the same questions. Thoughtful, engaging, and full of surprising moments, this interactive program allows you to reflect on everyday ethical questions in a way that's personal, relevant, and fun. That's Ask the Ethicist on July 24th at the Library of Congress. Get free tickets at loc.gov/live. Hey, you guys, so speaking of things Trump wants, at his cabinet meeting this week, he mused again about taking over D.C. He said he would make it so much safer. So much safer. Also mused about taking over New York. And as often happens when he does this stuff, there's a kind of a jump to like the logistics, right? Like, how would he do this? He would need Congress to overrule home rule. He would need this and that. The home rule charter does give him power over the police, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously a lot of outrage about we're Americans. We ought to be able to govern ourselves like anyone else. But there's like a few other elements that I think have maybe not, that are sort of going on. And as much as anyone can know what causes Trump's digressions, one of them was this congressional intern, Republican congressional intern, for whatever it's worth, was killed near the Mount Vernon Square Metro and what's supposed to be a safe part of town. This is kind of understandably a thing that is going to grab the attention of a lot of members of Congress, people who sort of are not of the community here, but the victim here was of their community, and they are going to be upset about that. I think it's the kind of thing that, like, every killing, every life ought to be equal, but some get more news than others, and some make more of an impact with people who have power than others. So I was sort of, that murder of all the murders didn't get a huge amount of like local press attention, but it's not equal to all other murders because its impact could be massive in terms of the governance of the city.
It's the classic cycle that we've seen so many times before, right? Which is, as you say, something, like this happens that grabs the attention of the national press corps, right? That would ordinarily not care about stuff that happens in DC. They therefore lob a question at Trump about it. And because the iron rule with Trump is that if you ask him about literally anything, ask him if he thinks Bigfoot is real, he'll say, well, we're looking into it very strongly. And so this is exactly the case that I think you see again with DC. Add in, the results of the New York mayoral primary, where he's feeling like, he needs to exert control over these Democratic cities that, he's lost. DC is an easy punching bag in this regard because he can exert a little more control over the city than he can his former hometown. So I think this is all brewing in a big stew here. He's, made a lot of noise about this, dating back to when he was running for re-election. But you even heard in his answer him saying we have a very good relationship with the mayor, even as he's threatening to take over the city. So it's muddled as ever.
So the other thing that I think is interesting about this is that it comes at a time when crime in DC is actually down. Like comparatively, we had that massive homicide spree, I think back in 2023, highest since the 90s. But now it's actually kind of creeped lower. But one thing, right, Trump can do is take over Metro PD.
For a time.
And so it's interesting to me that he would be like, yeah, my relationship with the mayor is good, when he could just completely, circumvent the mayor and be like, hello, Metro PD, hit me.
The mayor's like dancing as fast as she can to like make issues of Washington, D.C. governance not on the radar screen of the White House or camera-seeking members of Congress, et cetera. One of those ways is trying to push through the stadium deal. In the D.C. Council, it is being slowed down by process objections. Quibbles, maybe legit, but at any rate, this is a thing where the NFL is very powerful, the billionaire ownership are very powerful, the members of Congress are famously pretty flexible when it comes to the desires of billionaires. So this is another thing where, like, if Bowser's point to the council is, listen, if this doesn't go through, they're going to basically say, look at these people, they won't do anything, they can't govern. So you've got to just say yes to this. And that argument, it feels incredibly unfair if you're a person who's like trying to think through the moral and economic implications of the stadium deal. It may have the virtue of being true, though.
I'll say two things can be true at the same time. It is absolutely the case that Republicans in Congress love meddling with DC. since they are the ones who, sort of cleared the way for DC to get control of the RFK land, they do have some leverage here. There's some language in the legislation that got passed that said that, if the terms of this lease are violated in some way or another, then Congress can sort of step in. I guess they could make an argument that, somehow DC hasn't lived up to their billing, but there's nothing in the legislation that says they have to have a stadium. It says that they can. So, maybe they've got some leverage here. Maybe Trump, has no formal role, but he can kind of lean on people and make things unpleasant. I don't know. I don't rate those as especially high possibilities, except as, useful negotiating tools for the mayor and for the commanders. Certainly, they could make a more concerted effort to get Trump's attention and get the attention of people like James Comer on the Oversight Committee. But at the end of the day, even Trump himself said, the DC Council, they're looking at it and they should take their time to do that. His comments were a little more measured, than even were initially reported. So, I think that it is certainly a fact of life in DC that the feds can, step in and make things more complicated than they should be. But I think what this really is the commanders and the mayor not getting 1,000% of what they want. They're going to get this deal. They're just maybe going to get it 2 months later than they wanted, and threatening, sort of the federal boogeyman once again. It's a very useful negotiating tactic for them.
Well, in fact, the idea of listen, if you guys don't do this exactly the way the bill is written, DC Council, it could be opened back up in ways that are real bad for everyone, because all of a sudden you'll have the president, who is himself a real estate developer and hotelier, not divested from his businesses, and random members of Congress deciding that it's like a Christmas tree they're going to hang some stuff on. So, you reopen it and maybe there's a demand that there be a Trump hotel, right next to this is what a friend of CityCast, Junaid Deal, reported this week. You open it back up, maybe there's a Trump hotel right next to the stadium. Maybe, who knows what happens. So the argument from the mayor to the members of council, not quite explicit, is just do it this way if it's good for us. And it's a kind of thing that strikes, it's going to feel very, very unfair, which is not to say it's necessarily bad advice.
To me, the approach is so bizarre to say that we absolutely have to have this deal at exactly this timeline, or else will invite the sort of interference in our governance that theoretically we're opposed to? I just don't get it. I mean, they've basically caved the council on pretty much every issue of substance, except they're saying, well, we want to make a few changes on the edges to help us save face. I mean, let's be honest. That's what they're doing here, is they're trying to throw in a few provisions, a few, community benefits or whatever. But fundamentally, this deal is not going to change. They're raising a few objections here and there, but it's going to remain the same. And for that to not be enough for the mayor, she's going to get what she wants, or for the team. I don't quite understand it, but I mean, this is what you do when you want the council to move quickly. And I can tell you, they're feeling the heat. They spoke about it at a meeting this week. They are not thrilled about any of this.
One other thing that's recently happened is the FBI building, which had been supposed to move to Maryland. There had been a big dueling campaigns between Maryland and Virginia about where it would be located. When they announced desire to move out of the Hoover building, it was because the building's falling apart, but also ostensibly for their security needs. They need a building that's updated, blast-proof, and so on. But now Trump says he wants to move them into the Ronald Reagan building, which is vacated by USAID, but it's got a food court. It is not up to those security standards. So someone's going to have to give them a waiver. That's someone in the federal government, that is. But it's just to say, again, the things that are supposed to be handled by process are not, we're in the sort of post-process era, that things are done because someone wants them done. And, in this case, that's a number of jobs a number of people who will still be commuting into DC instead of commuting to Greenbelt. So in theory, those folks got to go out to eat someplace, and it's good for the local economy that way. But in practice, it's just sort of another indication, another argument for the mayor over council about how much of these things that are very important to the city are the subject of a whim at this point.
Oh, for sure. I look at all these deals and Prince George's County is just getting screwed left and right over here with like the imminent departure from Landover, and everyone who went to the Beyonce concerts over the weekend basically was like, Landover's a mess. And like that could not have been better advertising, right? For the Harris Group, for the mayor, all that stuff. But I have worked from that Reagan building downtown. And like, let me tell you, it's like sort of secure, but not really. I mean, I imagine Greenbelt and the Maryland senators and House members are going to fight tooth and nail over this, because for them, this was a promise to them basically saying, hey, you know, we want to restore faith in this community. We want to restore jobs and economics in this county as well.
Hey, when someone else's negligence changes your life forever, figuring out what to do next can feel overwhelming. You need lawyers who won't back down. The NACE Law Group has been winning serious injury and wrongful death cases in D.C. for decades. They don't just settle, they fight for real justice, and they're not afraid to take cases to court to get it. You might remember them as Paulson and Nace. It's the same trusted lawyers, just a new name. If you need someone in your corner, reach out to NACE Law Group for a free, no-obligation consultation. Visit WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com or call 202-463-1999. That's 202-463-1999.
When you hear Lululemon, you probably think of Align yoga pants, weightlessly soft, like you're wearing next to nothing. That's why you see them in class, at the grocery store, and in the park. But did you know about skirts with built-in liner shorts so you can still jump for the Frisbee? And tanks and bodysuits? With Align's iconic stretch, you won't want to take it off. And with endless style options, you don't have to. Shop in-store or online at Lululemon.com.
Wait, Julia, give us some good news, man.
So I don't know about you all, but when I was little, 6, 7, 8, I was a huge fan of Fireflies. So one fun thing that's popped up is that there are more Fireflies than usual. And you might not be alone in noticing it. There's been a population boom because we've had a really warm and wet spring. Basically, this provides good breeding grounds for lightning bugs, for fireflies. It basically has areas for the eggs to just like stay and be warm and heated, enough moisture, all that fun stuff. They warm up, they hatch, it's all good. We did not have a late frost this year. And typically that's the thing that kills off all of these bugs is, you know, there's some April, like cool day, 40 degrees, and it kills these bugs. And that did not happen. And so now there's even more fireflies in the area lighting up the night sky. You guys, firefly hunters, did you guys go around when you were kids grabbing them, fist and claw, all that fun stuff?
Very much so. And I'm glad that the research is backing up, you know, the perception that I had that there more recently. I thought I was just going crazy or maybe getting lucky and seeing more. But I'm glad to see it. One, as you say, a rare bit of good news.
Yeah, for sure. I know my dog, Sandy, has never seen a firefly and she tries to eat them. And I am worried that she's going to eat these things and get sick. Fun fact about these, there's more than 2,000 kinds of fireflies. I bet you guys didn't know that. Also, they're not bugs or flies. They're actually beetles. So we should be calling them like fire beetles, maybe.
Are there places, parts of town, et cetera, that are more likely to be firefly charmed than others?
Yes. So anywhere woodsy, anywhere where you can have that kind of like moist, warm environment where they can lay eggs and they have that shelter, that's where you can go. So places like Rock Creek Park, some of the suburbs that have any forested areas, anything like that is where you can go for prime firefly spotting. Like the National Mall, I think, will have some, but it will not be as many as like maybe closer to the tidal basin. Again, you want that warm, wet, leafy area.
All right, today, paid subscribers get a bonus 4th roundup chat. This is about our redone Metrobus lines. If you want to be sure you always get the full episode, become a member. Head to membership.citycast.fm and sign up. It's only $10 a month, and members get ad-free listening, exclusive members events, and an extra events newsletter every week. Again, that's membership.citycast.fm. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. Our production team this week was Priyanka Tilve, Annie Reese, Julia Karen, and Ash Durbin. Newsletter editor Kayla Cote-Stemmerman wrote our fabulous newsletter, Hey DC, this week. And our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer from Politico. Music is by Alex Roldan, with additional music from Philip Ayers, DM, Elot, and Rue Walker from Triple Scoop Music via Getty Images. If you enjoy the show, why not tell everyone about it at the bus stop instead of complaining about the new routes? We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.